Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are going to explore something that affects every single one of us, literally every second of every day. Now, I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that the human body is this incredibly complex high-performance vehicle. And any high-performance vehicle has an internal dashboard, right? A set of dials and warning lights that tell the driver exactly what's going on under the hood. Well, your body has a dashboard too. And knowing how to read it is absolutely one of the most empowering things you can ever learn about your own health.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever wondered how we can actually read our body's internal warning system before a complete breakdown occurs? Like, how do medical professionals know almost instantly if you're stable, improving, or secretly deteriorating? Well, they look right at the dashboard. We really need to understand what these dials are trying to tell us, because even small fluctuations can be the very first whisper that something is wrong, or conversely, the reassuring sign that the whole shebang is functioning perfectly. So, these dials on our dashboard are known in the medical world as vital signs. They are objective, measurable indicators of your body's absolute most essential physiological functions. We're not talking about subjective feelings here, like, oh, I feel tired or I feel a bit under the weather. No, we're talking about hard, quantifiable data: temperature, pulse, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. Monitoring these is crucial because it gives us a baseline of your normal state. And once we know your baseline, any deviation helps us predict deterioration or improvement long before the visible symptoms ever show up. Today, we are going to explore 5 core metrics: body temperature, heart rate and pulse, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Body temperature. This first metric represents the vital balance between the heat your body produces and the heat it loses to the environment. Now, when we talk about how we measure temperature, accuracy is everything. An oral measurement is incredibly common, but there's a crucial step that so many people miss. You have got to ensure the patient hasn't had hot or cold liquids for at least 10 to 15 minutes prior to taking the measurement. If you just chugged a glass of ice water or, sipped a hot coffee, your mouth is going to give a falsely low or high reading. It won't reflect your true core temperature at all. Once that waiting period is clear, the thermometer goes directly under the tongue, and the mouth stays totally closed until it beeps. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is you've probably been taught that 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit is the universal normal, right? But our baseline temperature actually shifts depending on our age. Kids naturally run slightly warmer because their thermoregulation just isn't fully mature yet. On the flip side, older adults often have a slightly lower baseline temperature. This is vital to know. I mean, think about it. A temperature that looks perfectly normal for a 20-year-old might actually represent a really significant fever for an 85-year-old. Behind the scenes, your core temperature is heavily regulated by a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. It acts exactly like the thermostat on your living room wall. When it senses you're too hot, boom, it triggers sweating and vasodilation to lose heat. Too cold, it triggers shivering to produce heat. We are always looking out for major red flags here: a fever over 38 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a classic hallmark of infection. On the other extreme, a drop below 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, well, that indicates hypothermia, meaning your body is losing heat way faster than it can actually produce it. Moving on to Section 2, heart rate and pulse. So this metric tells us exactly how fast the heart is working to pump all that highly oxygenated blood throughout your entire system. To measure this, we typically use one of 2 main methods. The radial pulse is the one you are likely most familiar with. It's felt right at the wrist, and it's the standard for routine everyday checks. But, sometimes checking the wrist just isn't accurate enough, and that's where the apical pulse comes in. This is taken by placing a stethoscope directly over the heart itself. It is definitely the preferred method for infants, since their tiny peripheral pulses can be super hard to feel, or for adults who have irregular heart rhythms, where a standard wrist check might actually skip a beat. And this brilliantly illustrates how age completely redefines what a normal heart rate is. A healthy adult at rest normally beats between 60 to 100 times per minute. But look at a newborn. Their heart is practically racing in comparison, hitting anywhere from 100 to 180 beats per minute just to meet their really high metabolic demands. As we grow, our heart gets larger and way more efficient, so that resting rate steadily drops down. So what are the extremes we watch for? Well, a rate over 100 beats per minute in an adult is called tachycardia. Now keep in mind that this isn't always a heart problem. Your autonomic nervous system will hike your heart rate in response to fever, pain, stress, or your body's classic fight or flight mechanism. On the other side, a rate under 60 is bradycardia.
While this can definitely signal a dangerous heart block, it can also be totally normal if you're, say, a highly conditioned athlete. Ultimately, your heart rate is half of the equation for cardiac output, which is your heart rate multiplied by your stroke volume. It's the literal measure of how much life-sustaining blood your heart is pushing out every single minute.
All right, section 3, respiratory rate.
Respiratory rate is an absolutely essential vital sign. In fact, research shows it's frequently the most sensitive, earliest indicator of patient decline. It often shifts way before blood pressure or heart rate ever do. And measuring it comes with a fantastic practical trick. Step 1. You must keep the patient completely unaware that you're counting their breaths. Why? Well, because breathing is both automatic and conscious. The very second someone realizes you're watching them breathe, they will subconsciously alter their pattern. They'll either slow it down or breathe way deeper. So medical professionals often pretend they're still checking the radial pulse at the wrist, while they are actually visually observing the chest moving up and down. You count for a full minute for the absolute best accuracy, though in adults, counting for 15 seconds and multiplying by 4 is standard practice. For adults, eupnea, which is the fancy medical term for normal, relaxed breathing, sits squarely between 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Interestingly, you'll note that as people get much older, past 65 or 80, that baseline can drift upward just a little bit due to age-related physiological changes. But for your average adult, 12 to 20 is exactly the sweet spot. But when that rate leaves the sweet spot, it's a massive clue for us. Rapid breathing, or tachypnea, which is over 20 breaths a minute, happens when the body desperately needs more oxygen or needs to blow off carbon dioxide. Think of asthma, pneumonia, or even extreme anxiety and pain. Conversely, bradypnea, which is dangerously slow breathing under 12 breaths a minute, points to depression of the respiratory center in the brain. This is exactly what makes an opioid overdose so incredibly lethal, or what happens in severe sleep apnea.
Next up, section 4, blood pressure.
So this metric represents the vital physical force exerted by circulating blood against the inner walls of your arteries. You might think taking blood pressure is just, strapping on a cuff and pushing a button while you chat about the weather, but physical positioning is incredibly strict here to avoid getting a falsely elevated reading. The patient needs to be seated or lying down. The bare arm must be supported precisely at heart level. If the patient is sitting, their feet have to be flat on the floor. Seriously, just letting legs dangle can actually reduce venous blood return and alter the reading. And finally, no talking, and they must be completely relaxed. Missing just one of these steps can easily skew the numbers and lead to a totally false diagnosis of high blood pressure.
So the crucial point is, to truly read this dial, you really have to know what those two numbers actually mean. Systolic pressure is the top number. This represents the peak pressure wave that travels down your arteries at the exact moment your heart actively contracts and ejects blood. Diastolic pressure, that's the bottom number, represents the baseline pressure in your arteries when the heart briefly relaxes and refills between beats. Both of these are absolutely critical for ensuring blood is constantly perfusing your organs.
Let's look at the ranges here. A normal, healthy adult reading is less than 120 over less than 80. As those numbers creep up into the 130s and 140s, we enter the stages of hypertension. This is chronic high pressure that quietly, silently damages blood vessels over time. But look at the bottom row, hypotension, where the systolic drops below 90. If you ever combine a plummeting blood pressure under 90 with a rapidly rising pulse, the dashboard is literally screaming at you. That is a major, major red flag for shock, meaning the body is failing to deliver enough blood to keep the vital organs alive.
And finally, section 5, oxygen saturation.
Oxygen saturation, or SpO2, is a vital sign that really gained widespread public attention during the COVID-19 pandemic. But how do we measure it without, drawing blood every time? It's actually a fascinating piece of simple technology called a pulse oximeter. You attach a small clip to a finger, a toe, or an earlobe. Inside that clip, invisible beams of light pass directly through the blood in your finger. The device reads how that light is absorbed to instantly calculate the percentage of your blood that's successfully carrying oxygen. A really great pro tip for accuracy is to check the pulse rate displayed on the oximeter against a manual pulse check at the patient's wrist. If they match up, you know for sure the machine is getting a solid, reliable signal. When it comes to oxygen, the safety threshold is remarkably strict. In normal, healthy reading on just regular room air is between 95 and 100%. If that number slips below 90 to 92%, it strongly suggests an underlying respiratory condition or even cyanotic heart disease. But if you see a reading drop into the 80s, we are talking about a severe emergency state known as hypoxemia. At that level, immediate medical intervention and supplemental oxygen are absolutely required to protect the brain and vital organs from cellular starvation.
Let's move to and see how this builds together into the bigger picture. We've looked at temperature, pulse, respiration, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. But the true magic of the body's dashboard is that you never look at just one dial in isolation. It's like a giant puzzle. If oxygen drops, the respiratory rate and heart rate will immediately spike to compensate for it. If blood pressure plummets, the heart races to keep things flowing. It is a completely holistic, beautifully interconnected system. So I'll leave you with this. Next time you feel unwell, what exactly is your body's dashboard trying to tell you? And are you paying close enough attention to listen? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.